Well, this is Think Like a Headhunter and Interview Like an Executive. Hi, I'm Barb Goldman. Here I am. I was for 30 years an executive headhunter. I owned two recruiting firms. I trained recruiters in Fortune 500 companies all over the United States. I have been around the block. I became a coach 3 years ago. And I'm a certified professional coach, certified executive coach. I'm RMT coach, and that's that Tony Robbins. It is strategic intervention coaching, and also CAC, which is an addiction coach. They call that a rehab coach now, a recovery coach, but it's still a CAC. I'm a member of the International Coach Federation, which is the global standard for coaches. I'm a C-suite whisperer. When they say something to you, I can tell you what that means because I have an honorary PhD in office politics. About 3 years ago, I decided that what people needed from me is they needed the real truth about how people get hired, why they get hired, and how to best practices, what to do now in this environment. And it is much different than it used to be. Okay, let's start thinking like a headhunter. A headhunter always thinks, how much is this candidate worth? If you make 100,000, you're probably worth anywhere in a fee from 20,000 to 30,000 for a headhunter. If you make 300,000, let's triple that. So let's say a $300,000 person is worth $60,000 fee. So that headhunter, why are they going to talk to someone who's not worth a fee? They are paid when they place you. You're not really worth much to them if they can't find you a job. You know, a lot of people complain about headhunters. They only complain because they don't get what a headhunter is trying to do and which side a headhunter is on. Who's paying the headhunter? The company. The employer pays the headhunter. That's the side they're on. Never forget that. Unless you're paying a headhunter, they're not on your side. They're on the company's side. All they want to do is fill that job. How much are you worth to them? Now, you have to think, what is your value to a company? Because that's the way a recruiter thinks also. First, they think about the fee. Then they think about, why should a company hire you? What can you bring to the party? What is your value? What have you done in the past that this company may need? You know, when recruiters talk to employers, they they will get needs that they don't write up. You know, they get needs that they know. If I ever find a such and such, if you're out there recruiting, you ever find a such and such, we'll hire them. Recruiters are full of that kind of information. So when you talk to a recruiter, when you talk to a company, you need to understand, why is a company going to hire you? What is your value? And if you don't think value, what your value is, then you're not understanding recruiting. A recruiter, after they decide what the commission's going to be, that's number one, then what can this candidate bring to an employer's bottom line? Why is this candidate special? You need to think that way about yourself, because that recruiter is going to use that knowledge to sell you. The recruiter is also going to say, okay, what companies would need this person? What companies? And don't be surprised if the companies aren't all in the same industry, because a recruiter is going to think very broad. What companies could need you and why? You need to do the same thing. A recruiter doesn't look for job openings. A recruiter creates job openings. A recruiter stumbles on job openings, finds job openings, but they aren't looking for them on Indeed. If a recruiter's looking for jobs on Indeed, then they don't have much to do. So you need to think like a recruiter. What companies would you give value to? Now, here's another thing a recruiter does. Research. A recruiter knows her industry. You will notice that if you are working with recruiters that are very successful, they're usually specialists. They will specialize in an industry. Now, if you're working with a contingency recruiter, they specialize very narrowly in an industry. So, what a recruiter is constantly doing is researching what is going on. That's how recruiters find jobs. What's going on? What's the news? Who's leaving? Who just got hired? Who's being bought? Who's being sold? Where, what companies are succeeding and what companies are failing and why? You need the research because you're going to act on research. If you're always acting because there's a job out there, then you're not going to find the good stuff. You need to research companies. And that research is ongoing. When I work with someone, we take 90 days, and that 90 days is a lot of research, a lot of looking into what is going on, what moves to make. How can you decide where you want to be unless you know what's going on? And too often, when you're working in a company, you're in a little bubble. You don't know what's going on out there. You need also, when recruiters call companies and try to place a person in a company, they're doing business. This is doing business. And guess what? When you network, when you reach out on your own, when you do the very same things that recruiters do, when recruiters call a company about you, what are they doing? They're doing business. When you call a company about you, what are you doing? You're doing business. Always, you're doing business. You do not have your hat in your hand begging for a job. Recruiters who beg for anything are poor recruiters. They don't last very long. You go in and you do business. Now, don't worry so much about openings. You need to worry about what's happening out there. Because if you worry about openings, you're just thinking, well, these jobs are filled until somebody dies, and that's not true. The jobs that you're going after are constantly being refilled. Let's take a look at what's going on out there because people don't stay with companies forever. You need to think like a headhunter. A headhunter knows this. People don't stay at companies. If they're doing a bad job, they're gonna be there a lot shorter. Okay? The median tenure for CEOs, now this is large cap companies, was 5 years at the end of 2017. Now, if you look back 15 years ago, go back into the 90s, you're looking at 17, 18 years. So 5 years for a CEO. The tenure of tech workers. If you look at how long tech workers stay in the job, that's a mayfly. An adult mayfly lasts about a day. Okay? Look at what's going on with tech workers. Uber was at the very bottom of the list. Their short average employee tenure was just 1.8 years. Their valuation is 72 billion. Things have really changed. Dropbox, 2.1 years. Airbnb, 2.6 years. These big tech companies turn people over quickly. There's a reason. Everything's changing. And you have to think like a headhunter. What's going on? Where is that change? And how can that create opportunity for you? Also, let's think about the company. People used to think, oh, you get a company, you get a job, and then you're going to retire from that company. Well, guess what? The lifespan of big companies was about 60 years in the 50s. In 2019, the lifespan is 10 years before a company is bought, acquired, liquidated, or just no longer exists. Companies, everything is changing. You have to change. When you look at this whole big job market, it's musical chairs. This can be fun if you look at it right. That's the way recruiters look at it. A headhunter looks at it as, look, I'm playing musical chairs, and I am going to win if I put one of those fannies that I'm working with in a chair. That's how I'm going to win. And that's how you're going to win. You are putting your butt in a chair. And it's going to be a chair that will come open over the next year. It doesn't have to be today. If you're currently working, look at the market this way. Constantly changing, constantly evolving. It's musical chairs, and you can win if you know how to do it. When you think like a recruiter, a headhunter, you are first in line. You're the product. You're not waiting in line. Recruiters are aggressive. When you're working with a recruiter, if they think that you can fill that job, they will be very aggressive to set up that interview. They don't just send your resume and cross their fingers. So you need to think like a recruiter. You need to be first in line. You need to follow up, and you need to not assume that just because you send your resume out, that's all you need to do. That is not what you need to do. I also want you to think about this. You know, a recruiter will think, what is this person worth for a commission? Okay? That's what a recruiter thinks. I want you to think about something. What are you worth? What are you worth in salary? What if you lost your job yesterday? What is your monthly cost of not working? Now, a recruiter, a headhunter, is always placing people. They can't afford to not place people in jobs. So, if you feel that it's time for you to move on, you're probably right. Be ready. Because what are you worth? What are you worth to your family? Okay, we've already figured out what are you worth to a company? What are you worth to a recruiter? Now, what are you worth to yourself, to your family? If you procrastinate, you're just hurting yourself. A recruiter never procrastinates. When a recruiter sees opportunity, they jump on it. And if they don't, another recruiter will. Just like if you don't, somebody else will. The first thing that I want you to do is start with a career assessment. Go through your resume, and this is the first thing I do with people. Let's look at the whole career. I want you to look at wins and losses. So let's start taking notes, because as you look at your career, and this is how we do an assessment, you're going to look at every position that you had. What were your wins? What went great there? And what were the losses? If there were any, perhaps there weren't. What did you do in an outstanding way, and where did you fall short? I want to go through the whole thing with you. Well, you'll go through it yourself, is to truly look at your career. Because when you look at those wins, you're going to look at what you did right and what you can do again, right? When you look at the losses, did you learn? What kind of business maturity did that give you? And we need to figure that out, because that's part of your story. That's part of your story, is your wins and your losses, because that makes you human. As you go through your story, you want to show that you have matured. So the first thing we do, a career assessment. So get out your resume and start looking at that career. For every job, make a list. What were the wins? What were the losses? I think I had a little technical blip there. Okay, when we start then, here's the process to get started. Because the first thing that you need to do to think like a headhunter, When you think like a headhunter, you are approaching companies, you are networking, you are not thinking about jobs. You're thinking about your worth to the company. What are you worth? This is important stuff. So the way we start is a career assessment. Go through a career assessment. Now, when you do the career assessment, I want you to see if you can quantify, okay? Because with the career assessment, you start to look at your accomplishments and quantify those accomplishments. I increased retention. Well, by how much? And what was that worth to the company? I improved, I improved sales, whatever you did, and quantify it. And also quantify it in a way that's going to make sense to the person that you're talking to. Usually a percentages is the way to go, because companies are all different sizes. So sizes doesn't really tell as much of a story as a percentage. But what are you worth? When I work with a client, I'll always tell them, this is the way you look at it. Where did you improve the process? Where did you come up with a good idea? Where did you bring more money to the bottom line? Whatever you did, we've got to look at that and quantify it. That's your worth. What companies? What companies? What companies need you? You need to keep a list. And this is what we do, what I do with my clients is we keep a list, and I like to do it on a spreadsheet so that we can share it. And what companies are you going to go after? And also, what's going on with those companies? This seems like a lot of work, doesn't it? It's not. This is your career. This is your life. We're talking about the difference in the money you make, the people you work with, your ability to be happy. This is worth it. So who are you going after? Why? What can you do for them? You have to have a story, okay? And then what is the story? We begin with what is your story? And starting from who are you? Why are you doing the things you're doing? Are you in aviation because you were the little kid who made paper wings and jumped off the garage? You know, what is your story? And the reason that we go through all of this, and it seems like a lot of work, and it is, but it's fast. It's fast. I have a process. It's fast. But we go through all of this so that when you interview, you are going to mesmerize them. You are going to be able to tell people who you are right now, what you do, what your passion is. And that's where people get stuck. And when you're at the executive level and you're going into the executive level, the words that you use, what you can convey in your interview mean everything. Now, after we do all that, put all that information together, then what I like to do is a living resume. The resume that you are using is great to start with, but then boy, do we change it. And I'll tell you why we change it. First, it has to be a resume that is adaptable to different jobs, different companies. And so we do a copy paste type of thing. When you apply to a company, that company, the application is going into the database, right? Goes into the database. And let's say a company gets 1,000 applications for the job. How are you going to stand out? That database needs to pull your resume out. Not only that, once it pulls your resume out as a possibility for the job, the recruiter that is looking at that resume needs to be sold. So the living resume, you need to write a resume that is alive, that jumps out at the company, jumps out at the recruiter and gives them a little kiss on the nose and says, here I am. You have your target list that you're going to go after, the people. Now here's another thing. Once you're applying, when you apply with this beautifully, this living resume, And for more information about the living resume, uh, just apply to subscribe to my newsletter, and I will send you some information about how to do it. It's on my website too. But after you write your living resume, then you need to follow up. Just because you send a resume in, does that mean anybody saw it? I have so many people who, if you have applied to a job and no one, and you're qualified, unless you're applying to jobs you're not qualified for. If you're doing that, then I can't help you. But if you're qualified and you're being ignored, that can be fixed. And one of the greatest things to do is follow up. And follow up in a soft, helpful way. When you follow up, you're just giving everybody a heads up that you can do the job and that you're right here. And you'd be surprised. Um, the people that I work with, when they start doing what I tell them to do, and this is a hard thing because people don't want to follow up. First of all, you have to find out, you have to do some research. Who are you going to call? What are you going to do? What are you going to say? But you need to follow up. And when you follow up, you'll get an interview. Because you know what? Without an interview, what do you get? Nothing. You don't have a chance. If your resume is not noticed, if you are ignored, you do not have a chance. So follow up. And don't be worried about that because you need to land the interview. And that's what a recruiter thinks, a headhunter. A headhunter doesn't think about anything but landing the interview. How can I get an interview? How can I get my candidate in that company to interview? Because once the interview happens, the recruiter has very little control. So I want you to think that way. Your whole focus, and this is the focus isn't a beautiful resume that you can send out to everybody and then just send them out and then keep sending them out and get hundreds of them out there. No, that isn't the focus. The focus is when you are applying, then you are going to apply to land the interview. And if you don't land the interview, you keep following up. Now let's talk about the interview itself. And the interview itself, this was a very long webinar that I have cut down because I hate long webinars, and I just want to give you a lot of information that is kind of condensed. But when you interview like an executive, you are stepping up and having influence in that interview. And the way that you do it is you practice a conversational interview technique and practice your behavioral interviewing. And do that before you interview. When you're interviewing, your focus is going to change throughout the process. So in the beginning, you should be out there networking, selling yourself. You need to make sure that you're selling yourself in a way that makes sense, that companies will understand, again, focusing on what you can do for them. When you are in a screening interview, again, you're selling your skills. And you want to make sure that that screening interview, again, it's mostly about you. It's mostly about you. When you go and your skills, always, that's what a screening interview is about. Now, when you go into a one-on-one interview, your focus changes to the employer needs. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the STAR program as far as interviewing, but if you go online and look up the STAR interviewing process, this is an exception. Because when you are interviewing with the employer, you focus on what they need from you. You want to understand them. It's more of a business meeting. Now, if you're asked to respond in a STAR way, then you're focusing on your contribution, just your contribution. So there's a balance there on what your focus is going to be during the interview. Also, when you're asking questions, Ask the right questions about the job, the employer needs. What do they need you to do? What's the time frame? This is all going to give you the ability to converse during the conversation. Now, when you're in a group presentation or again, a group presentation, you will have a presentation that'll be about what you have done or what you're working on, and then the focus will be on the individual group members' questions. And the team presentation, a team interview will mostly be about you and your team, and it will be a group with individual questions. So understand that when you're focusing during this interview time, it's going to change, and you need to really remember that it's not all about you. You've got to find out about the employer as you're going through this. You need to ask questions that will be open-ended and will produce the kinds of answers that will give you a lot of clues as far as what they want, because you want to be able to tell them that you can give them that. Let's look at this STAR method. It is a great way to practice, and I like to use it. Everyone's using it now. Amazon was using it and continues to use it, but STAR means your situation, what the task was, what the activity was, the action that you did, and what was the result. It's a very simple way to give your presentations and to answer behavioral type of questions. They want to hear from you. They want you to tell a story. Okay? So you're going to use the STAR in this. Now, when you are telling your story and using that STAR, make sure that it's short, because the person interviewing you will get lost in your words. So make it short. What was the situation? One sentence, two sentences. Very few details about each part of this. Also use metaphor. It can bring people in and make them understand your message better. Be prepared to tell your passion. Why do you do what you do? If you've ever seen Simon Sinek, look for him on YouTube. He wrote Leaders Eat Last. You can find it on Amazon. And a lot of this stuff is real boilerplate. But he is a person who really has tapped into this why, the passion. That's what companies are looking for. It's not enough for you to just show up anymore. You better be able to convince them that you're passionate about this. Okay, your elevator pitch. If you haven't put together an elevator pitch and practiced an elevator pitch, it's time to get going. There's a lot of different ways to do it, depending on who you are talking to. You should have an elevator pitch for your boss so that you can keep them updated. You should have an elevator pitch for everyone that you really need to update, or anyone that you are introducing yourself to. There's a lot of different ways to do it. If you'd like me to send you, I've made a few videos about this, and I do go over this with my clients. And if you'd like me to send you a video, just write to me, and I will send you some ideas about this, because it's important. It's important that you be able to tell who you are in a short way. I want you to think about people. They have very short attention spans, and no one wants to hear you drone on, just like you don't want to hear me drone on, which is why I made this very short. Also, need to know. Don't go down the rabbit hole with these stories. Make sure that when you are telling a story, when you are responding to a behavioral question, you don't tell too much. Just need to know. And as you practice, you'll see what might not sound the best. And rehearse, 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 rehearse. When you finally have a chance to sit down with someone, it is showtime. It's showtime. And it's your interview, it's your show, and you will look like an amateur unless you rehearse. If you're interested in taking the next step, as a coach, I work with people who are currently working and want to very discreetly make the next move, and also those who are unemployed and need to move fast. I have a three-part program. The first part is the online class. And I've put together an online class with videos that you can follow whenever you take the online class. You also are going to have a strategy session with me. You and I will meet, and then you'll start the class. Then, the second part, the living resume. You can choose to do the living resume yourself. If you can do it yourself and you're really happy doing that, that's great. If you would like some help, I have a 3-step one-on-one coaching program, and that includes that's the living resume. Um, and because you are on this webinar, it includes the 90-day hard launch. So if you're looking for the class and the living resume, it really is the way to go. Now, after the resume is written, if you would like some interviewing help, some preparation, then that is the third part of the program. I've divided the program into 3 parts so that everyone can just do what they need to do. Some people can start with the 90-day hard launch and they're fine. They don't need me. And others would like me to help them with the coaching. Now, the total plan, if you see, for all 3 sections is $2,025. Now, if you uh, purchase all 3 parts at once, there is a package discount price of $17.45, so you save money. So I will send you that information. You will receive that. All you have to do is click for it. I'll give you all the information, and if you want to get started, the very first thing that everyone does, the very first thing, is you start with the class. So start with the class, we'll talk, come up with a strategy, and then decide what's good for you. Thank you. Thank you for taking part in the webinar. I wish you the best of luck. And if you have any questions, you'll get an email from me. And if you have any questions, email me. You'll also, because you were in this webinar, uh, you'll have an opportunity to talk to me for a free consultation so that we can talk about your situation. I look forward to meeting you. Have a wonderful day and think like a headhunter, interview like an executive.